The Prime Minister Kevin Rudd and the opposition leader Tony Abbott are set to square off in Parliament tomorrow when the government reintroduces its emissions trading scheme and the opposition announces its own direct action on carbon emissions.
Now the debate will be closely followed by climate change sceptics, including the former science advisor to Margaret Thatcher, Lord Christopher Monckton. He's in Australia on a month-long speaking tour and he joins us now. Lord Monckton, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Virginia.
So as you know, both the government has been grappling with trying to get an emissions trading scheme through Parliament and the opposition is dealing with its own plan to try and reduce carbon in the environment. Do you say that both sides of politics are barking up the wrong tree? They don't need to be doing that?
There is no need. We now know that CO2 has a warming effect that is only 1/7 of what the United Nations Climate Panel thought it was. Its 2007 report is now hopelessly out of date. So there isn't, in fact, a problem with carbon emissions anymore.
Well, there have been more concerns raised about the IPCC report this morning about a prediction on the rainforest in the Amazon. But even sceptical media are saying that with the concerns over those predictions, the central thesis that greenhouse gases can heat the world remains very strong.
Oh, well, it's not just very strong. It's self-evidently true. The question is this, though, Joe. How much extra warming will you get if, as we will this century, if we don't mitigate our carbon emissions at all, how much warming will you get? The answer is 1/7 of what the UN says, and therefore take away the UN's exaggeration and you take away the problem. But even if the problem were as big as the UN says it is, an emissions trading scheme has nothing to contribute to reducing carbon emissions worldwide, and here's why. You either set your price of a tonne of carbon so low that it makes no difference to how much people emit, in which case you achieve nothing climatically, or you set it so high that you shut down your industries here, the business goes to countries like China where they're not going to have an emissions trading scheme, I can tell you that for free, and there the emissions per unit of production are higher than they are here, and paradoxically therefore you end up increasing the world's carbon emissions. So if you want to cut carbon emissions, which is unnecessary anyway, the ETS is exactly the wrong way to go about it.
But looking at your view and a few others' views on climate change and your deep scepticism or rejection of it, Tony Abbott, as I understand it, won't be meeting with you while you're here.
Well, I can't comment on that, obviously.
But well, we know that he won't be. And Stephanie, and even Senator Barnaby Joyce, who's a well-known climate change sceptic, has described you as being from the fringes of this discussion and that your views aren't terribly helpful. So I wonder, who is your constituency?
I don't have a constituency. What I have is a careful background in researching policy questions of this kind from a scientific perspective. As a classical architect, I obviously have quite a good working knowledge of applied mathematics, or the building I live in would have fallen down. And therefore I can apply that knowledge to analysing a scientific question, together with the training in how to evaluate complex policy issues. And my conclusions, having done quite a careful exercise on this over the last 3 years, is that we do not have a problem. Now, if I were alone in this, I indeed would be on the fringes. But what is happening is that politicians who find it expedient for political reasons to pretend that I'm on the fringes and that they're in some kind of mainstream are getting increasingly desperate as the IPCC's science collapses. I mean, we've just had a few days ago an announcement by the lead author of one of the chapters of the last IPCC report to the effect that he knew perfectly well that the Himalayas weren't going to see all their ice melt away over the next 25 years, but he left that figure in anyway because he wanted to put pressure on governments. And people like Tony Abbott and people like Kevin Rudd are responding to that pressure on governments that shouldn't have been put there by scientists who are now admitting that they have told lies. How many more scientists have to come out and admit that they've told lies before it begins to dawn on people that the mainstream science is in fact that we don't have a problem? It has been prodigiously exaggerated. There are examples of bent science all the way through the IPCC's documents, and the truth is now at last, thank goodness, beginning to emerge.
You say there are examples of bent science all the way through it. After 2 years, you've only come up with 3 or 4 instances
on the contrary,
that have been confirmed as being incorrect or dodgy science.
On the day of publication, I saw that the bureaucrats had inserted a table of figures that hadn't been in the final scientist draft that come to me for review, because I was one of the people that reviewed it. And I looked at this document, was horrified to find that the table of figures they had inserted had multiplied by 10 the observed contribution to sea level rise of melting Antarctic and Greenland ice sheets over the last 40 years. So I wrote to the IPCC and said, this is wholly unacceptable. You will remove this table or you will correct it. They decided to relabel it, correct it, and very quietly repost it on their web without announcing even that they'd made the change. That's happened time and time and time again, and of course most of the mainstream media have never covered it.
Lord Monckton, the prudent thing, it seems, in the eyes of most governments around the world is, notwithstanding the fact that climate change might be, by this degree or that degree, greater or lesser of a problem, is that if you have dwindling fossil fuels and you have pollution in the atmosphere, you've got a problem with water supply and water security, and you want to try and get rid of CO2 out of the atmosphere in as much as it might be harmful, then there's nothing wrong with actually putting in place measures that might take care of general pollution and also trying to take care of the fact that your fossil fuels are dwindling.
Right.
Why do you disagree with that as just a prudent measure?
First of all, general pollution is one thing, and that's a separate problem. CO2 is not a pollutant. It's necessary to all life. It's plant food. If you double the CO2 in the atmosphere, staple crops will increase their yield by 40%. There's actually a shortage of CO2 in the atmosphere compared with most of the last 600 million years.
It might have a deleterious effect on human life.
No, not at all. We've tested it up to 10,000 parts per million. That's what you give to somebody if they're having breathing difficulties.
Rather than in this brief time that we have rehashing all the science, what I'd like you to address, if you can, is your particular problem with just being prudent about what we have in the atmosphere and also taking care of having to put in place renewable energy.
Let me answer that. Here is what Herr Ziegler, who is the UN's Right to Food rapporteur, has to say about global warming. He says that when millions are dying of starvation, the diversion of food to biofuels as one of the precautions that has been advocated, without anyone checking whether the precautions would do more harm than what you're trying to prevent, that's killed millions worldwide. He said the diversion of food to biofuels, and these are his words, not mine, is a crime against humanity. If you get the science wrong worldwide on a global scale by globalized groupthink, and you then get the policy wrong, then you end up killing people by the million, as we are doing now. And I, for one, do not like that. Just because they're black, just because they don't have a vote, just because they're far away in countries of which we know little, doesn't mean they're not our fellow creatures too. It is wholly unacceptable that politicians and banks and bureaucrats should conspire together with many in the media to make money out of exploiting the miseries of the poor. It is time that it stopped, and that's why I'm here to say so.
Well, we'll see if there are many people lining up to hear your views. Lord Monckton, good to join us. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.